Thank you so much for taking our time today to join us in this thought-provoking thought leadership session. Um, Essentially, we are going to talk about why security could be actually a business enabler and not just a regular checklist item, right? It cannot just be a simple checklist where you say, here are 3 or 4 things, that I'm looking at when I'm evaluating a technology product of any kind, pretty much, or even a content collaboration tool, and seeing if the options I'm vetting comply with these 4 requirements, right? Or if they check off for these 4 requirements, right? That's one way to look at it. But I think the smarter way to look at it is when you start thinking of security as a productivity enabler, as a brand reputation, tool, and also something that's actually going to deliver strategic returns in the long term as your business grows. Now, to discuss that, I have with me Richard, who is Senior Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at Progress. And I also have with me Andrew Phillips, who is Vice President of Product and Cloud Operations. And of course, your host, that's me. I'm part of the product marketing team here at Progress ShareFile. Before we actually get started, I'd love to request Richard to introduce himself, and then we'll move along from there. Over to you, Richard.
Okay. Hi, Richard Barreto. I've been here at Progress as a CISO for 5 years. I've been in the industry 20 plus. I started my career in security as a ethical hacker and pen tester many years ago. I don't have the same skills like I used to. And prior to this, I was working at Vistaprint or Simpress as a security leader.
Andrew Phillips, VP of Product and Cloud Operations here at Progress. I've been here a year as part of the ShareFile acquisition. I was leading our overall horizontal effort, so everything from security to the cloud for ShareFile, as well as one of the product divisions. So lots of years in this space. I'm traditionally a software engineer, but spend a lot of my time now thinking about not only how to manage and deploy large scale cloud applications, but how to do them safely and securely.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Andrew, for your introductions. Richard, this is an interesting one, right? Because this is something I think about a lot in terms of how the industry looks at it. I'd love to hear your thoughts, right? Given your role as a CISO, what do you think is more dangerous today? Is it hackers breaking in, or is it employees accidentally letting them in?
Employees letting hackers in accidentally, I think, is probably the most dangerous, because when they did that, there was a certain level of trust in that activity, and they won't question it. When hackers break in, they usually have to do a lot of work to try to cover their breadcrumbs and hide whatever they did in your environment. And so it's kind of like like the Trojan horse. There's a certain level of trust when you let someone in. Like, and I'll just use like an example is PDFs, right? PDFs have the ability to have malware decoded or coded in the back end of it. You open the PDF, unbeknownst to you, some malware is being installed on your system. There's a level of trust that whoever sent you that PDF, you had either you thought too quickly, or to open it because it was curious enough, they made it enticing enough for you to open it, or you trusted someone to give you that PDF, and unbeknownst to you had malware. So for me, my opinion is employees letting the hackers in is more dangerous.
Okay. It also kind of reminds me of a recent study that hinted that 95% of data breaches that businesses face today come from human mistakes, which I'm assuming is usually, employees accidentally possibly clicking on, I don't know, phishing links, having weak passwords, their credentials being compromised, all of these things that happen, right? I mean, many of us have been attacked with such hack attempts. Hopefully we've all been smart enough not to fall to them, but it happens, right? I mean, the stats sort of are pretty alarming in a way. Now in a scenario like this, right, where almost all of the data breaches come from human errors, as we might put it. Why are systems still designed to rely on perfect behavior, right? In an obviously imperfect world.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of contradictory, in terms of how the tools solve, given the problem is probably out of control. So, what are your thoughts on that, Richard?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, uh, yeah, human is always going to. We're not perfect, and what makes this difficult. We try to design the system so that security is built in by default, right? But uh, attackers are not making it easier. We'll use phishing emails as an example. Attackers are going to try to make you do fast thinking without questioning what's happening, like in the email, make you click a link, make you open a file. And then once that happens, they've already they already established persistence on your system, right? And it's because we're in this digital world, we are we're just doing things very quickly. There's a lot of information being thrown at us. There's a really good book written by Daniel Kahneman, and he describes the way we operate daily. It's either fast or slow, or he calls it system one, system two. The attackers are trying to entice you to work on system one, which is the fast, right? They want you to work instinctively, right? Click on that link, not even question it, because, right, like they say, here's a classic example, employee, I need to transfer these funds. Can you do it? Can you do it right now? I'm stuck on the plane, but this has to get out really quick. Depending on like your process, or again, there's a level of trust, and depending on your organization, you might click that link, and guess what? Now you've given the attackers the ability to wire. And so that's what it is. They're really trying to force you to do the system one thinking versus the system two. Like, our training is usually like, if you see an email that you think you might be questionable, pause. Just take your time, read through it, look at the headers, look at where it's coming from. Have you received email from that email address? Now, I know it gets confusing because it looks like it's from my CEO, but under the covers, it's from some nefarious domain name in the back end. So systems, we try to do our best to make security by default, so we don't call it the guardrails, right? We call guardrails, so we don't make those like those mistakes when we're thinking fast. But yeah, it's a balance, right? And also going back to you want productivity, right? You want your flow of daily work to operate in a smooth way, but sometimes there has to be a give and take on security, and that's the tough part of my job, is to try to find that balance.
Got it. Makes sense. It's interesting, Richard. You talked about a CEO imposter attack, right? Because what I have seen, and what I've heard, from people in my circles, is this is this has only started to happen in the last 5-6 years, right? Probably around when COVID kind of kicked in. We're long past COVID right now. But I want to talk about hybrid work, which is still, sort of a daily reality, right? For many of us, right? Not everybody is doing work from office full time, while many of the organizations are still working remote. I think hybrid work is probably being a happy middle or a happy balance that organizations and employees have found. Andrew, do you think hybrid work has become like the biggest security experiment in our times? Do you think small and medium businesses are failing at how they handle security in a hybrid work environment, or are they doing well? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question and a great topic too. I think we find, especially in our areas, right, for software engineers, there's a lot of desire to enable remote work, and it's not just a COVID initiative, although that was probably the largest accelerator in that area. I would say that hybrid work is really a stress test for trust and process, right? So how much do you trust your employees, and as well as the systems that they use, right? So everything from identity to access control and device hygiene, right? Those are all really critical to make hybrid work possible. And so I'd argue that the winners are the ones that moved either in advance of COVID or because of COVID, to move into more zero trust models, right? Adaptive policies and systems that can handle that kind of distributed work. And the ones that have lost, and we see a pullback from a lot of industries to return to office kind of policies, are, I would argue, those are the ones that are losing, because it's that belief that if I can see my employees, I can watch what they're doing. One, that's a lack of trust in your employees. But two, just because you're in an office doesn't mean you're safer. It gives you that false sense of security. As Richard talked about, clicking on phishing attempts can happen just as much if I'm sitting at a desk or at home. So having a better system posture is going to be the winners there. So while I would argue that hybrid work didn't really break security, it really revealed where it was fragile already. So I think there's a lot of growing up, a lot of organizations need to do, as we all try and continue to work in the model that, one, our companies feel more comfortable in, and that our employees want to work in.
If I can add to that too, Andrew, like now that we're getting more digital, we're allowing more remote work, it's providing a nice benefit, right, for employees. I can work, in nicer weather, or it can be in Europe or wherever, and still do my work. But there's also a level of trust that you have to have with that employee. And I'm sure some of us heard the stories about where North Korea is interviewing with big companies. These are companies that are regulated, they have a lot of controls, and they're impersonating as IT employees. And so that also introduces risk. But going back to like what Andrew was saying, if you have good verification systems, if you have good zero trust principles built into your workflow, then you should be in a good place.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. And what really comes to my mind, as you say that, Richard, I'm just trying to connect things, from how attacks are increasingly becoming automated as well, right? And I'm trying to sort of recollect a conversation I've had recently with with a few businesses, and small businesses primarily, right, who think that we are too small to be a target. Now, do you think that thought process is still valid given whole automated attack scenario that we're seeing today?
Yeah, I mean, the reason automated attacks happen is because you can spray like a large attacks in a swath of targets, right? And then whichever one is open to those vulnerabilities, now you have many vulnerabilities or many companies to reach. And size doesn't matter. I don't think the size is the big thing, because in this world, we operate because we're so much more digitized. There's a supply chain everywhere in any of our businesses, and it's not only third party, fourth party, fifth party. And so all those, if you go down the value chain, they may be smaller companies, but they do introduce attacks to your company because of the value chain.
Yeah, and I think whether a small business has faced an attack or not, and when they've not faced the attack, or when they've not interacted with other small businesses that have not faced an attack yet, they probably seem to think that they're safe. But I think as you said, there is a supply chain, and big part of that supply chain, possibly the most important part of that supply chain from a business point of view, is clients, right? And clients don't think that way. I mean, there is that general paranoia about tech. um, you know so what I'm trying to get to is, clients are obviously going to be a little too worried, a little too concerned about how their data is being handled, right? In other words, they're trusting their service providers, right, with their most sensitive data. And this is a question, Richard, and to both of you. How can service providers show that on a daily basis, when clients put their trust in them, how can they ensure that they are worthy of trust, that they deserve that trust that the client has placed in them?
Yeah, I can start with this one. I'll use an analogy. When we fly on our planes, there's a certain level of trust, right? Because we think the airline is making sure things are safe. So we don't question it as often. Now, when you start to hear things in the news where either Delta may have potentially crashed, that's when the alarms start to go off, and then you start to second guess whether if you want to still fly on Delta. Same applies. Same exact, there's a level of trust that you have with your third parties and your partners, or consumers and your clients have that trust on you because they want you to operate safely because they're extending their not they're yeah they're extending their operations to you, right? And without you, you're basically a part of their team. And so like we work together, there's always going to be a level of trust. And so once that trust is broken, it's what we say is trust is hard to get and easy to lose.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's 2 points on that too. And I'll go back to my time at ShareFile, leading from a product perspective, and then my continued role, managing the data in the cloud for ShareFile. There's 2 things really. One is showing, not telling, right? We can show you how we're protecting your customers' data, and those are transparency, making sure that we share details about our product, right? We have a trust center where you can go in and see all the data about all the third parties, right? So that validation step is really important so that you get the confidence and then your customers get the confidence, right? So that applies to everything we do. That repeatable transparency is really critical. And then culture is really another big part of it. I always liken it to treating your customers' data like it's your own, and you want to protect your customers' IP like it was your own, protecting that the assets or the files or the workflows, because that's a brand reputation, right? Like that's our ShareFile's brand is based on the trust that you have in it as a product. And so that's the way you kind of handle it, right? So both from culture and then showing and not telling.
Yeah, I kind of want to do a double click on that to understand what security really is worth, right, for a business. I mean, what really changes when a small and medium business or a business of pretty much any size stops to see security as just a half-baked checklist item and starts to see it as more of a strategic way of doing things. Richard, what are your thoughts on what
Yeah,
changes when firms actually make that
compliance.
shift in
Yeah,
mindset?
compliance checkbox is not security, although it gives you a glimpse on the way we operate, right? And if we have the basics in our environment from when it comes to security, uh, yeah, it's an enabler. It's table stakes. Like for any company today that's operating on the internet, exchanging information on the internet, uh, if that's broken, like I said, going back to my comment is, it's hard it's hard to gain that trust, but easy to lose. And once you get your reputation tarnished, it's very difficult to get that back. And so just to close that on, a good security operations will have good basics in place, and that's why these compliance
Mhm.
checkbox audits give you that confidence that they have the basics in place.
Right. Okay. If I were to kind of build on that thought, going on a sort of a wild tangent there, do you think security can also become a marketing advantage in maybe competitive industries, maybe industries that are, you know, assumed to be, you know, compliance heavy? And again, I don't even
Mhm.
think compliance is possibly the
Yeah,
restriction.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. So, you're looking at vendors or solution providers, and you come down to two, and then you go to the trust center, and one might have one or two what we call compliance icons, and then you have another company that has like five or six, right? Where are you going to go? It's like kind of like like when you eat at a restaurant and I go on Yelp, do you have 2 stars or 5 stars? You want to go with ones that is spending a lot of time and an effort and investing in security versus ones that may not see security as an enabler. They might see
Mm.
it as like you said, just a checkbox or a line item in their in accounting.
Okay, sure. So kind of taking on with that Yelp example, right? Um, you know, I typically use, we have alternatives to Yelp here in India, but what I typically use such a service for is to see, what are my different options, right? And then I would probably go on, either on social media or onto their, websites, and I'm trying to sort of, continue on that analogy here, right? I I might end up spending too much time. It's kind of like, you're browsing Netflix to pick a movie to watch, but you're spending half an hour just to, figure out what to watch, right? It's kind of borderlining. Do you think it's kind of borderlining on being overly cautious, right? Can a situation of feeling that we are too secure for our own good arise, right? Where is that balance line, that organizations need to drive between being cautious and between being paralyzed by security fears and paranoia?
Yeah, I'll give another example. So in the government, right? I worked in aerospace defense contractors. Uh, they take security like it is ingrained in their culture. Every single step has a security step in it. Like I can't even walk in the building without putting my phone in a locker that has RFID, safe and stuff like that. It really comes down to the culture of the company, and that's what I'm trying to get to. It's the culture of the company, what's tolerable when of risk, because we take risks, and there has to be a balance. How much risk do you want to take, right?
Mm.
Do you want to draw, like do you want to fly with a system that I can't think of an example, but do you want to have a system that can fly on its own, or an airplane that can fly on its own and it's constantly monitoring, safety checks, or do you want to fly on a plane that's, just bare bones, right? So it really depends on the company and how much risk are they willing to take, because there's a cost. But we look at, and I always tell this to our leaders, is that security, there's always going to be a cost of business, and security has to be part of that, and it's table stakes.
Got it. Okay, I kind of want to, change gears a bit. I want to talk about something that's new around the technology side, artificial intelligence, right? AI is changing, both in terms of how attackers, operate, in terms of how, products operate, in terms of how secure they are, right, for businesses. How can SMBs realistically leverage AI, for their security needs without needing a full-fledged security team or,
Hmm. Yeah.
SOC of sort, in their organization?
Yeah, going back to, we were talking about like doing your due diligence and trust. What's the nice advantage of AI is that it can get large data sets and analyze data sets at really awesome speeds that we never had before because of Gen AI and LLMs. You can use that as a tool to go and do due diligence. Say, okay, has this company ever been part of part of a breach? Now, someone can say, argue, can a browser do that? Yes, they can. But what I love about AI is that it can give you more insight, right? It's not just a list of web pages and a bunch of articles. It'll do the analysis for you and give you like insights into into all that data that it just analyzed. Uh, if you're a really small company, I would do is challenge your vendors and how they're using AI as an advantage to their company, because
Mm.
uh, depending on your company, if you're an accounting company, if you're a small clinic, right? That's not your wheelhouse. Push that onto your vendors. Let the experts deal with that, and then ask them and challenge them how they are using AI to protect you and to protect your information.
And I think to follow up on that too, right? So I think that's the right message, right? It's starting small. You use the tools that you have, force them to or request that they enable AI capabilities within it. But it's as much from how you as an SMB function, think of it as an augmentation, not as a replacement. This is especially where we are on the maturity curve. I would think of it as combining AI detection with human judgment. you have staff already or people that are looking at these kind of problems, use it to help augment the work that they do, and use it as like a force multiplier, right? Like this is where that can augment the security or the capabilities or product vision or accounting practices that you have across the board. So overall, using it in that way really will help you as an organization grow and mature, and again, as a force multiplier for what you do.
Yeah, that's
Got
great.
it.
It's a great point, Andrew. Using AI as a multiplier, it'll pay dividends. And yeah, it's just amazing how, like I said, it can take large data sets and just analyze it and give you answers in minutes versus hours. What would have taken hours of painstaking analysis time?
Right. Andrew, on that point of, AI is a force multiplier, it's obviously not a silver bullet, right? And I think everybody understands that by now, not to trust AI fully. But there are obviously things that AI can solve for. There are things that AI can watch out for. This is something, I think that's going to be a challenge for small businesses, because they just want to have the resources to really put so much effort and time into it. But there are still possibly some signals, right, that something suspicious is happening that a business might tend to overlook, because they say, what, I have a tool that's really secure. There's AI taking care of things. But then there's probably something just slipping away. What are some of those signals you think small businesses should watch out for?
Yeah, there's a couple of good ones, right? As we talked earlier on the first topic, which was what's the biggest risk, whether it's outside attackers or internal. This is also where those kind of signals can show themselves, and why it's important to make sure you have the right culture in place. So one example of that is depending on what kind of security tooling you have, right? So if you're a 365 shop or an Okta, it's those MFA pushes, right? Those are a big risk, and that's an easy thing for people to overlook around that. And those are a sign of somebody trying to breach, whether it's people or a system. And those are things that that something might be going wrong, and it's easy for people to overlook it. That's kind of a culture thing, right? If you see something, say something with that, right? So we would want our staff to report that to our operations team, to say, hey, we're seeing something weird. Hopefully as well, your AI and tools are detecting those kind of breaches, or potential breaches. But yeah, that's one good signal. The other one is, and again, this can be from multiple forms and sources, and what we look for is things like new admin accounts popping in, login or activity that's strange hours, what's referred to as impossible travel events, which is like, I've logged in to my accounts from based out of Raleigh, so in the Raleigh area, and then magically I pop in and I'm in Russia, right? It's an impossible travel event, and those are the kind of things that are indicative that there might be a problem. So that's what you would want, again, to take advantage of the tools and security posture that you have to look for. And again, when you're a smaller firm, you might not have the heavyweights to protect you. So it's making sure people are diligent on these kind of things. If you're getting a MFA push, make sure people know to report that in. So yeah, that's I think that the response would also be, most breaches whisper before they shout. There's small indicators and signs that they're coming, and that somebody might be poking around at the outside before it happens, before you have a full breach.
Great. MFA is something I like a lot, but it's also sort of an inconvenience, right? Because it's two steps, and not just two steps, on the same screen. I have to pick up my phone, get to the authenticator app, and then punch in that pin, right? So it sometimes it just feels like it's slowing me down. I'm probably someone who errs on the side of caution, so I'm okay with taking my phone up, spending those 5-10 seconds additionally to actually be super safe. But Richard, I want to ask you, as a CISO, this is possibly a challenge that you are still trying to find that silver bullet of an answer for. How do you balance frictionless user experience with stronger protection, right? Given that MFA
Yeah,
is
going back, going back to usability and the experience. Uh, First of all, if you're not doing MFA personally, like for your bank accounts, for anything that you log in, you're more than likely to going to get attacked. There's a really good website called Have I Been Pwned? Have I PWND? Put your email address in there, your personal email address, and see how much data is out there for attackers on maybe current passwords or even past passwords. This information is it's inevitable that your username and your password is going to get cracked. In this day and age, especially like I was talking about AI, because it can do stuff at lightning speeds and with large data sets. You have to turn on MFA. So back to your question, the user experience has to be good, because actually I was questioning it today. I was logging on my one of the websites I was going to. I forgot the password, although I try to keep everything in my password manager to automatically push it in. I just forgot the password. So it gave me an option. It gave me an option of do I email you a code, right? So that means now I have to log into my my email, right? Hopefully it's set up, and then I have to find the email, right? Hopefully it didn't go to my spam, right? So now you've taken me to like 3-4 steps. But then there's another website I went to. I said, oh, I forgot my password. It says, no problem, we'll log you in. Put in your number. We'll send you an SMS text, and you tell me the code that I just sent to you. Now with Apple, what they've done a brilliant job of is once you get that text, there's a little gray bar that goes above the keyboard that actually has the code. You just press that, it automatically fills in. And guess what? Now you're in the actual app. To me, again, that's a user experience. Which website are you going to likely use? The site that has, we'll call it a better user experience. Now, is that safe? People will question is, yeah, anyone can clone another phone, but the likelihood, it always comes to likelihood and risk, right? So risk is about likelihood and impact. The likelihood of that happening is still very low. So that's where you have to find that balance. But again, it depends on also the type of information you're trying to protect.
Absolutely. You talked about, have I been owned, right? So that kind of is sort of a situation where you've probably been owned, and you need to kind of, go and repair the situation in some sense, right? And so I have a question that's probably a bit obvious. Andrew, this one's for you, but also I personally feel it's a bit nuanced, right? As you know, and I kind of would request you to step into the shoes of a small and medium business owner. In their shoes, if you could choose, what would you prefer to do and why? Would you rather detect, a threat faster or sooner, or would you recover once you've probably been alerted to a possible risk?
Yeah, and that's a great question, especially since it matters no matter the size of the organization. This one is critical across the board. Would you rather detect faster or recover faster? I think that both really matter is really the true answer here. Detection saves your reputation, right? If you detect it first, you can announce it, you can protect your customers' data, and then recovery really saves how you operate, right? Like those are the two pieces of that puzzle. So my recommendation would be, don't focus on perfection, because we're never going to be perfect. You're always going to have risks, whether it's people or systems. So focusing on resilience is going to be the important part here. Some of the things we've talked about earlier of how do we handle identity and access management? How do we detect failures in that? How do I protect my customers' data? Do I use customer encrypted keys for that data so that you reduce the risk of splash attacks if somebody is able to access a system. I think my answer would be, yeah, focus on that resilience instead of perfection. And then as we talked about with culture, right, it's about making sure you're putting that into practice. Everything from backups table trap drills, and clear comms are really critical. Because it's not if, it's when, and then it's how big. If you have the right practices in place early, you can reduce the risk, you can reduce the blast radius, and protecting your customers' data is the critical piece at the end of the day.
How does tracking every file's movement, help an organization strengthen control and deliver higher client trust, not just client trust, but also internally feel more confident about how the files are being moving around?
Yeah, it's like like in a physical building, it's having cameras everywhere, right? So you can trace and see what the activity is happening. And yeah, uh, without logs, my team can never investigate anything, right? We don't
Hmm.
know where the breadcrumbs are. We don't know where the attacker has been. We don't know even what files they were accessed, when they accessed, how long they accessed it. So having that visibility is key for from a security perspective. Even from an operational perspective, you want that we'll call it the logs or that visibility, because if something breaks, right, something's not being sent to somewhere, how are you going to trace it? You have no idea,
Hmm.
right? You don't know where it stopped, where it got blocked, or where it went to. And so unless you have that visibility, you gotta it's very hard to operate from both operational perspective and security.
Sure. Just sort of, kind of, clicking on that a bit. Yes, it is important to have that visibility, but if you're unable to, have that visibility, right, in terms of, whether you're not able to see how and when and by whom and, how frequently or how much, in terms of number of files that are being shared, that are being accessed, what are the kind of risks you see that organizations might run into? If you could call out three risks.
I'll use a hypothetical story here, right? Is one company gets breached, and they have to obviously say, "Hey, we've been breached." Their customers are gonna, all their customers are gonna ask, "Was my information involved?" And if you don't have logs, it's not a good story to tell your customers. You say, "Oh, we just had a blob of data. We're not sure exactly what it has, or what was in it, and
Hmm.
it left the building." Versus, "Sorry, customer, we apologize. There was a failure in our security posture, or this attack came on us. However, the, the information was the information that was lost was only to a subset of our customers. If you're my customer that has been impacted, we will contact you." Right? And so going back to the whole discussion about trust, who would you trust going forward?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah, I think that addresses the question well. It's still a bit tricky, I think. But yes, thanks for that insight, Richard. Okay, I think we are coming towards the end, but I have, I've left the best questions for the end, one for each of you. Andrew, this is something I often think about, right? And I'm sure, or in fact, I hope our attendees think about this as well. As an organization, how do you balance transparency with privacy, right? Having visibility without it feel like, sort of Big Brother watching over or surveillance. Big Brother might not be the right term for me to use here, but how do you balance between visibility and surveillance, right? Or that perception that gets created, when you're handling security for your teams?
Yeah, that's a great question too. And I have a history across, just like Richard does, different sized organizations. And so it's interesting to see, some startups that have been at the response I get, and then to large international banks, that where Big Brother is a real thing. They are actively monitoring everything you do. But I think the best thing here is putting a spotlight on it. As I said, light is the best disinfectant, and so making sure you're explaining why you're doing what you're doing, is a great key, both for your internal staff, right? Like so they don't feel like they're being monitored for no reason. It's, we're protecting our customers' data. We're making sure that bad actors don't get in. Explaining why gives the safety versus suspicion message. People don't wonder why you're doing it if you tell them directly what you're doing and why. So I think that's really important. And then from an analysis perspective, we've talked about AI doing that analysis, but keeping oversight as like an aggregate, not personal, is really important there too, and making sure people understand why you're doing that analysis. But when you're looking for patterns and trends, you're not looking at a single person's data. That's not an interesting thing. So I think that's another really big key. And then it's really about building trust. Making sure that you have the correct gates, as we talked about, like zero trust and things like that. It also matters for your employees' data and your customers, right? Well, why am I accessing it? Why am I doing analysis against it? It's to protect them, make sure it's clearly demonstrated why it's happening, and I think that's how you build trust and make sure it's clear why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid way of looking at it. Even if I look at it personally, right, is as an employee today at Progress myself, I think having that sense of trust that my employer is having my best interests in mind while they're handling security. I think it just keeps me reassured that yes, everything's going good. I have one as well for you, Richard. Like I said, I've reserved one interesting one for the end. But I do see a couple of questions coming in from the audience as well. And the first one is more around compliance, right? How can firms today go beyond just meeting regulatory requirements, right? I think what this is possibly hinting at is oftentimes security and compliance are seen as the same thing. They're not, right? So, how do you look at compliance versus security? And how can firms go beyond just meeting regulatory requirements, again, as a checklist item?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would do is hire the security company and just do an assessment of your environment. But what I would force that security company to do is to be able to show me the risks and then the potential impact to my business, right? Because it's all about the business. I always tell this to my team is without the business, security doesn't exist, right? So how do you get a firm to look at and do an assessment, right, of your practices, and then they'll give you recommendations and a roadmap on how to get there, right? And then of course in that roadmap there's always dollars and costs. Goes back to risk tolerance. How much risk do you want to take as a company and your reputation, and how much do you want to invest it? Yeah, it could be looked at as an insurance policy, but again, unless you invest in security, then I think you hear the theme here is security has a direct connection to trust, and you want to be able to build and sustain that trust with your customers, because once your reputation is tarnished, it's very tough to repair.
Right. Yes. Security, I think, merits that investment. Beyond just looking at it as a list of items to sort of check off. So that's an interesting one as well. The other question, Andrew, I think this probably is, I'd probably direct this to you is, as a technology product, you've overlooked, ShareFile's security strategy as well. How do you design security for small and medium businesses in such a way that security just happens in the background, right? So that their clients, their internal users even, are not noticing it, and they're just being productive, right? Because end of the day, that's really what they're there for.
Yeah, no, it's a great one, and I think it for like an SMB, Richard hit on the nail first, but a broader answer, which is pick your partners well, right? So pick your partners from an identity perspective, a system perspective. Ones that have security as the backbone of what they do is really critical. So if you're talking about how you manage files and assets and identity, make sure that you're making those choices, and then it's culture. Making sure everyone has that belief that security is their responsibility. It's not just the responsibility of a security team. And having good practices and standards in place makes it a lot easier to run and operate in that kind of a culture.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm going to see if there's any other questions from the audience. I think this is the sort of questions that's there from the audience. But before we enter into that last question, I just want to remind the audience again. You can click on the icon at the top right with a question mark on it and drop your question there. And while we wait for those questions, Richard, here's one for you. If security is everyone's job, right? Because you're talking about trust. And I think trust is sort of a two-way street. It's probably a shared responsibility in some sense. How do leaders make it everyone's habit, right? It's everyone's job. How do you make it everyone's habit that it just flows like second nature, easy peasy?
Well, yeah, democratize security. It's a team sport. It's a what do you call it? It's a saying that we hear every day, but there's a lot of truth to it, right? Uh, so and Andrew can probably attest to this. I'm very conscious about the experience for my team members, so that it's easy, right? So like, if I suspect there's a phishing email, I don't have to think about it. I'm just going to click this button and say report phish, and it goes to the security team and they do their analysis. I do the same with our engineers. How can I blend security into their workflow? If I kind of like we were using the analogy when like if I forget my password now, I got to go into my email and then I got to go in and log in and I got to go and find that email. Engineers go through the same thing and same we'll call it work process in a lot of companies, because now they have to go to another system. They got to look at their data and they're going to have to see the vulnerabilities and then what does this vulnerability mean and how do I fix it? Right? But we're trying to blend it early in the process so it becomes security by default. And to me, the work experience, make it easy for the team members so they don't have to go to other systems. It just gets blended in their workflow. And again, if you design systems, we can go through. There was I was thinking about this in one of the questions you asked Andrew. Is we go through a threat model, right? Anytime we design a system, we think about all the potential hacks that can happen to that system and make sure security is built in against those attacks, so that our customers don't have to think about it.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. I think the simpler you make it, it just naturally is going to become everybody's habit. Well, that was interesting. We covered a bunch of things, and that kind of brings us to a wrap for today's session. I really hope for the audience listening in, watching us, sort of discuss on some of these, interesting tangents around security for your business, for your teams, for your client confidence. We really hope this session was, helpful. It was useful. You probably, picked up a few new interesting things today in terms of what to look for, when evaluating a technology product from the security lens of things. I'd like to once again, thank Richard and Andrew for your valuable time. Thank you. Have a nice day.